Yeah, old school. That's what I'm talking about. Listen, this ain't for everybody. Some of y'all need to hear this. I know you're in the trenches fighting, but check it out. I'm gonna put it down like this so I can help the saints understand. Everything you're going through is all part of the master plan. Or what? You thought cause you got saved everything was gonna be peaches and cream? You better wake up, son. Don't nothing come to a sleeper but a dream. Faith without works is dead. Read your Bible, you know what it says. He who don't work don't eat. Blackers don't get fed. Yeah, Jesus said he who puts his hands to the plow looks back the same ain't fit. Some of y'all ain't been in the trenches 5 minutes and you about ready to quit. I ain't mad at ya, I'm just hitting you with the real. If you died for me and I was still tripping, now how you think that make you feel? Check this out, deep game, this here's deep. Some of y'all ain't sawing nothing but you started trying to reach. But unto him who is able to possess your fathers by his glory. Struggles might be part of your testimony, but it ain't the end of the story. Now the point is this was prophesied way back in the day. Choir, sing your hook right here and see if the church can relate.
I know we can make it. Oh, we can make it. I know good and well. I can work it out. Work it out. Work it out. Yeah, he'll work it out. I know we can make it. We can make it. I know good and well. I can work it out. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Yeah.
Thinking not strange, the fiery trials wanted to try you. You say, why you? But your church say, what would Jesus do? Why you asking if he ain't trying to do what he's saying? He told you he was going to have tribulations, but you thought he was playing. 1 minute you're telling how good God is and can't nobody beat your talk. The next minute you're backsliding so fast, it's like you're moonwalking. Oh yeah, I'm preaching to myself because I ain't no better. It ain't like I've been following his every word, obeying it to the letter. But we soldiers, we got to remember that. Regroup, stay on point. Yeah, bow down, confess, repent, stay humble, let him anoint. It ain't easy as I thought it was. I'd be lying if I told you that. But it showed up getting better all the time. Trust me, that's the fact. Ain't nothing we going through that can't be handled. God put that on his son. Like they say, you can shout now if you want to, cause the battle's already won. So while you're going through the valley, don't even trip. You're gonna be on top. Choir, sing the hook line one more again. This time you don't stop.
I know we can make it. We can make it. I know good and well. I can work it out. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. He'll work it out. We can make it.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to pump the brakes right there. I just had to give Big Boy a minute upstairs. You know, it's my thoughts and my belief, you know, he's going to help us find our way through this journey, this thing that we call life, because there's a whole lot of madness out there right now, and we definitely need his direction. Well, thank you for joining us again. This is Can a Player Play, and I'm your host, Lamont Patterson. I would definitely ask you guys at this moment to get your pen and paper out, you know, and take notes, because we're definitely going to be talking about, you know, a very important issue a lot of us take for granted. We're walking around every day so busy, you know, surviving, that we don't take time to, you know, smell the roses and really pay attention to what's going on. At any rate, today's show is there still time to avoid climate disaster. Our guest today is a lawyer, scholar, author, and climate warrior, Mr. Alan Miller. He has repeatedly been in a room where it happened, where policies on climate change and ozone depletion have been made and negotiated, often making a difference. Starting with his contributions to the successful protection of the ozone layer in the late 70s, his career, including directing a Center on Global Environmental Policy at the University of Maryland, and 16 years in the World Bank, supervising climate finance and participating in global climate negotiation. 40 years on, his work today as an author, teacher, draws on the wisdom gained from his unique experience forging solutions to the climate crisis. And we're definitely going to be getting into his book, Super Climate PollutantsNow. So we're going to be talking about all that. And with all that being said, let me see as I guess with us. Mr. Miller, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Lamont. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's a great honor.
Well, no, the honor is mine, sir. You know, you had so many accolades there, boy. I was trying to get through them. I said, let me leave some for Mr. Miller himself.
Well, right now, as you put it so well, the world is in such a crazy situation. I have to say, I'm partly, as you are, glad to be alive. It's quite a set of issues we're facing today.
You could say that again. You know, some friends of mine had a song out back in the day. The group was the Temptations, and they had a song out called "A Ball of Confusion."
I know it well.
Yes, yes. And it almost like if you remember the lyrics to that song and you look around what's going on today, you'd be like, wow.
Yeah, I'm actually from Detroit, so the Motown sound is very near and dear to me, too.
Okay, well, yes, sir. Well, then you know. So,
yeah.
Mr. Miller, we're going to jump into your book. I understand it's your second book, Cut Super Climate PollutantsNow. What do you mean exactly by, well, first of all, let's do this for some of our listeners that really don't understand all of what pollutants is. Why don't you give us a little bit what is a pollutant, then you can speak on what's a super pollutant.
Sure. So we, my two very wonderful co-authors, this is a book written by the three of us. We've known each other for several decades, Durwood Zelke, Stephen Anderson, and myself. And we kind of termed super climate pollutants because we wanted to make a distinction from much of what's really talked about, which is just focusing on carbon dioxide or CO2 and the need to reduce fossil fuels, which we completely endorse and talk about. But there are some additional non-CO2 sources of warming, or climate pollutants, as we call them. And by calling them pollutants instead of what you mostly hear about is greenhouse gases, right? So carbon dioxide is a gas. And these super climate pollutants include some particles, which are not gases. And that's why we use a more broader term of pollutants rather than gases. And the key thing here, which we can get into in some detail, I'm not going to turn this into a science lecture. I sure wouldn't want to do that. But basically is just that these are all sources of warming that can be reduced relatively quickly. And by relatively, we mean in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's a very critical time period because as a number of scientific reports, including a very significant one that just came out a few weeks ago, have told us, it's really just the next 10 years or so that we still have time to avoid really dangerous levels of warming. And we go into what ultimately I hope your listeners will agree is an optimistic message. We've heard a lot of gloom and doom, and we're describing what can be done relatively quickly to avoid some of these real disaster scenarios.
Well, that leads to the next thing. Why is action now so important when we've known about this problem for decades?
Yeah, really good question. So, in our book, we actually provide a little brief. The book is only 79 pages of text. Let me just provide that clear statement up front in case somebody's interested, that they shouldn't be too intimidated. But we have a very brief history about the science of global warming, which actually, incredibly enough, goes back to the mid-19th century and even includes a woman scientist who didn't get much credit. And that's back when we first figured out that carbon dioxide could absorb heat in the atmosphere. And the modeling to figure out, so on, was done as early as the early 20th century, more than 100 years ago. So we've known about this for a very long time. But it was really only kind of starting in the late 80s with some notable testimony from one of our leading scientist advocates who gave congressional testimony back in 1988, actually, on a very hot day, conveniently enough in Washington, saying that climate change due to human activities was happening and was going to be very serious. But it did not bring about any real action by government. So we've had this period now since the early 1990s when we first agreed on an international climate convention, actually back in 1992, signed by, surprisingly enough, George Bush back in Rio. So we've had an awareness, but we didn't really do much. And we came close a couple of times with legislation in Congress back in 2008 and 9. It didn't happen. And now we're being told by scientists in no uncertain terms that if we don't get a move on it, we are in big, big trouble. That we're now reaching a point where we could be exceeding what scientists call tipping points, which are really massive, irreversible changes like melting of permafrost in the Arctic, like the change in the Amazon from being a source of absorbing carbon dioxide to being an emitter of carbon dioxide as we've deforested the Amazon. And these things could be irreversible, they could be compound. And the end result is that while we've been seeing, as you know, Lamont, wildfires in California, smoke of horrific nature causing some of the worst air quality in many parts of the Pacific Northwest, droughts that now have forced the reduction of the Colorado River flow, et cetera, et cetera. There's almost no part of the country. Today, we just had a message from the president about hurricane reaching New England, and we're being told that hurricane intensity and frequency is another likely consequence of warming ocean waters. So
let me ask you this real quickly, Alan. What do you think? Why do you think there's such a disconnect between the scientific community and your everyday working guy or family?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, Lamont, I tuned into a couple of your previous climate-related podcasts, and I think you pushed a little on that question before. And
you telling on me, Alan?
Well, no, I want to tell you, I think it's a very good question without a very clear answer. And, you know, those of us like myself and my co-authors who've worked on this for a very long time have our personal views. You know, I've gone to almost 20 of the climate negotiations. I've been to endless meetings of climate scientists. Lots of really great people work on climate communication. And I guess my personal answer, the best I can give you, would be, first, I think it's in the culture of science to be very conservative. So I can just briefly recount how when there was a theory that hairsprays were causing ozone depletion, I don't think you're as old as I am, but I think you're of a vintage that you may remember this, that this was a theory. And they sent a bunch of scientists down to Antarctica because they were seeing a decline in ozone there every Antarctic spring. And when the scientists sent off very specialized equipment and airplanes to measure chemistry up there, they were pretty sure they had pinpointed that it was indeed these chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, and thus the need to ban them. But they waited to give this conclusion because, as one of the leading scientists later said in a documentary, what if we were wrong? No one would ever believe us again. So I think that there's this inherent conservatism among a lot of scientists and in the way they communicate. And when you, for example, look at this most recent climate report, the one that got a lot of media attention just a few weeks ago, I would caution anyone who is brave enough to look it up. It's a report of several thousand pages that is written in language for scientists, so that every other sentence is qualified by a parenthetical: confidence, medium confidence. I mean, this is not calculated to be immediately acted upon. So that would be one thing. And then the other really key point, and I don't know that you've talked about it as much in your previous discussion of climate change, but there's no question the fossil fuel industry, which understandably felt very threatened, and which includes some very large and very well-funded companies, spent a lot of money and a lot of effort suggesting that the science was uncertain and that doing anything about it would be damaging to the economy. And those were some pretty powerful and influential actors. And I think
sound like you finna talk about those politicians. They used to be politicians, but now they politicians.
Well, I won't. You know, I wanted to stick to kind of what can say with some factual certainty, but
okay.
with you. But I know you're very good at asking people's opinions on things, and so I'll do my best, Lamont.
Absolutely.
I'll do my best. Sure.
You know, from a layman's terms, you know, what I've really noticed about climate change, and I talk to my friends about it all the time, when we were much younger, we pretty much knew what the seasons were without having anyone to tell us. You know, we knew when school was going to be out, when school was just getting ready to start, just by the weather itself. You know,
sure.
I've been to Alaska. I've driven my boat in the Colorado River when there was actually water. You know, I've done those things. You know, I fish quite a bit, and I've also noticed the quality of fish has changed substantially in the ocean, and I understand that the temperatures are changing. And so, just from an everyday guy, just looking and paying attention to what's going on, and referencing times when it was a little bit different climate-wise. You know, now you pretty much, from where I live, you don't even know how to dress in the morning when you leave. You don't know whether to dress warm or cold because you don't know what the temperature is going to be later on in the day. And I know all
right.
that goes back to what we're talking about.
Well, you're absolutely right, and the whole notion of what is climate, I think, is, you know, it combines so many different things, and we're seeing the changes in multiple factors all at once. And just, if I could, I by coincidence, I was just up in Alaska. I spent a couple weeks up there this summer, and in fact, I was interacting quite a bit with some naturalists up there, and witnessed glaciers that were calving. And I visited a salmon hatchery, so I know you were a fisherman. I heard you talking about that, right?
Yes.
And
I fished the Kenai and did the halibut fishing there. I did them both.
Well, I mean, more than 30 years ago, I went up with friends. One of my co-authors, Stephen Anderson, organized a trip for us above the Arctic Circle. We went on the Noatak River, way, way up there. And what I saw, however, this summer, when I went to the fish hatchery, they told me they've had to completely change the areas in which they can fish different salmon species. That changes in the ocean water have really affected where commercial fisheries are. And it's a really big deal for commercial fishermen because I'm not a fisherman, so I didn't know some of what you might know. But it's very regulated up there, and you get a permit that's specific to an area. So you know, if the salmon are not where your permit is, your boat has suddenly been devalued, And
it's kind of misleading too, Alan, too, because when you leaving from here to go salmon fishing, they don't really just tell you can only entitled to one of each species. You go there with the impression that, oh man, I'm finna go catch a whole bunch of salmon, but it's not really like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, people still are going up there, and there's quite an industry and tourism and everything that's around it. And
beautiful place.
It's spectacular, and we saw just a small number of glaciers. There's several. I didn't realize there's several thousand glaciers in Alaska, and almost all of them are melting. Almost all of them, and it's, they're pretty massive. It's not like they're going to disappear in 5 years or 10 years, but I think about I have a daughter who's 28, and I'm 71. I think if she goes up there when she's my age, she's going to see a very different place, and it's going to be a very different ecology. It's going to be very hard to describe just everything that's changing all at once, just as you were saying, Lamont.
Those some beautiful blue glaciers up there too.
Oh goodness. I would have to say, anyone who might be thinking about it, go soon.
We say go soon.
Go soon. Yeah, go soon. But those glaciers are spectacular, and as you said, the blue of the water that's frozen in them it's quite a sight. Yep, it is.
That's the only place I know you can go and see bullwinkles walking around like they're a common dog.
Yeah, we were very pleased. We saw bears, we saw moose. Mountain goats.
That's what I was calling bullwinkles. The mooses, they're everywhere.
Oh yeah, yep. They are a sight to behold too. Yeah.
So back on our climate thing, Alan. Why were you saying that reducing the CO2 emissions, won't affect things for years to come?
Yeah, this is the part where it gets a little techy, and however, I think make it, try to avoid making it too technical. But first of all, CO2 has a very long time in the atmosphere. So quarter or more of everything that we're emitting today is still going to be in the atmosphere hundreds of years from now, millennia. So we need to reduce it. So it's not at all saying we shouldn't reduce it and we shouldn't switch to renewable energy. It's just to say that.
So let me jump in. Well, I'm sorry for interrupting. Sure. When my brain, gets going, I got to use it while it's working.
No, please do, Lamont.
We can go to the moon, but these particles that you said is in the atmosphere, nobody's came of a way to reduce that or get rid of that?
Well, we actually, in our book, we conclude with 3 things that need to be done. And the third one, and one that's getting more and more recognition, but frankly is the most controversial, is to focus on ways to take CO2 out of the air. And the least controversial way is planting trees, right? So we know that trees take up carbon dioxide. That's how they grow. The problem is, as fast as we're planting trees, we're burning them, partly because of deforestation, but also because of wildfires. So just this year, Siberia has had the biggest wildfires in their history, and more trees have burned down in Siberia than have been planted this year. So that's true. It is a good thing to do, but it is very difficult to do effectively. And when you plant trees, depending on where they are and what type, they take a while to grow. And then once they're fully mature, they don't really take up a lot of carbon dioxide. So that's led us to focus on technology that is ways to remove and store carbon dioxide. So there's a whole field called carbon capture and sequestration, meaning storage. And there has been quite a bit of effort and money poured into doing it. And there's quite a bit more being proposed in Biden's budget. So they're working at it. And there are things that have been tried, like giving prizes. So Richard Branson, for example, put out a big prize for carbon removal. So people are trying and they're working at it, but there's nothing really commercial that is going to make a big difference yet. And it also may be pretty expensive, at least in its early versions. So your point is, bringing that up is a really good one. And ultimately, we hope, in our book, we say by the middle of the century, by 2050, 2060, maybe that will start to become significant. But right now, and for the next 20, 30 years, it seems very doubtful that it can be commercialized, proven, and scaled up fast enough to really make a difference. At the same time, people are, including in your state of California, there's a lot of tree planting. And there are many cities that are doing it, not just to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but to try to make places like where you live cooler, right? So one of the great things about having trees in cities is that they tend to reduce the urban heat island, or, the hotter temperature we find in our cities. I don't know if you've been to Phoenix, but Phoenix is often cited as the classic example because it's typically 2 to 3 degrees centigrade hotter there than in surrounding areas, just because of all the pavement and dark surfaces that absorb heat. So
I've been there. I just haven't been there recently, but I know how hot it get in Phoenix and Nevada.
Well, yeah, both of those are places where they're really looking at some of these ways of trying to, use lighter surfaces, planting vegetation. I don't know if you've seen any buildings that have plants on the roof, green buildings, but it's a kind of cool thing to do, and it does work. But, I think we're a long way from putting plants on everybody's rooftop, right? I mean, it does help. And out your way, they're also using lighter surfaces for some streets now. I don't know if you've seen any, but they've shown that also can make a difference.
I think what's kind of scary to me, Alan, as humans, we still haven't learned how to get out of our own way.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And yes, I'm not.
I mean, we're planting trees, to fix the situation, but then you still got these people stuck on the fossil fuels. So I mean, where is the balance? I know that may be outside of your area of expertise, but you're making me think. Where is the balance? Or is there such a thing as a balance?
Yeah, well, and that's why that is such a tough question. And I know you had a couple of great shows where a couple of the other authors in this book series have talked about, some of the ways of organizing communities and the individual actions that people can take. In our book, our optimism comes from saying there are just these few ways, these few super pollutants that can be reduced in the relatively near term, right, in the next 10 to 20 years, And they're not, fortunately, mostly as controversial as some of what you just alluded to, like getting people out of their SUVs or, fortunately we are seeing, as President Biden likes to talk about, Ford has announced that their most popular selling truck is coming out in an electric model. Yeah.
I love it. I've seen it. I love it.
Yeah, I actually think a lot of companies are ahead of the game here, and some of the investment banks and people, pension funds and the like, you probably saw the story about how Exxon was forced to accept 3 new board members, all of whom have a climate change perspective, and they were elected over the opposition of the company. This was revolutionary.
Wow.
And this was.
I was just asking myself, how could that happen?
Yeah, no kidding, right? Well, the answer is really kind of interesting. It turned out that a very small investment fund that had like 0.001% of Exxon shares started this initiative. And the reason it was successful is because they were able to get really big pension funds and investment funds on board. And this is a trend that's been happening now just the last 2-3 years, partly through people like Mike Bloomberg, the billionaire class, right? And some of these funds have percentage shares of Exxon. They're not teeny tiny. These are, things like BlackRock that have trillions, literally with a T. And you almost have to repeat it because when I teach, students are, what? Billions, they know. Trillions with a T. And so this very small fund was able to appeal to these much larger ones, and they talked to the Exxon management and were not impressed. Exxon management tried all sorts of stall tactics, even called a recess during the vote. They did all these things, spent a whole bunch of money trying to communicate with their shareholders, telling them, we don't like these people. But they were 3 extremely qualified business people. It was very well done. They didn't pick just anybody. They found 3 people with exceptional credentials who also happened to be really well-informed and concerned about climate change. And sure enough, they got these 3 new board members. So I think that's also just indicative of, to come back to your point, Lamont, it's, I think there are things happening. It's not just what governments are doing. It isn't. What governments are doing is important, but, just to come back to one of your other points, which is what about this troublesome gap in between how science communicate and what the rest of us hear and know and politicians do? Well, I just wrote a blog about, or not a blog, but I posted a short message online about things that Greta Thunberg has said about climate change, and how in a lot of ways I think her impact has been because of how she communicates, right? I mean, she's a teenager. It's not that she's she's studied and knows a lot, and if you watch, there's a great documentary about her, and she's pretty impressive, but let's face it, she doesn't have a PhD. She's not a climate scientist. But the way she communicates in language that all of us can understand, and especially her generation, I think in some ways is having more impact and influencing young people in ways that the scientific documents, no matter how many thousand pages, how many thousand references, in the same way.
I totally can understand.
It's quite remarkable.
Well, it's almost like the Pied Piper syndrome. I mean, you really have to communicate in the form and manner and the language that people are accustomed to be communicated in. If you speak to them over their head, they're not hearing nothing you say. If the same as in the music industry, if they don't like the beat, they're not going to listen to the lyrics.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I went myself for almost 20 years to climate negotiations. It was a great gig, went all over the world, Buenos Aires, Bali, can't complain about it. But until Greta came and spoke at the UN, nobody got the message across the way that she did. And when she really just came and said to this group of adults, shame on you. And I think she brought a sense of moral outrage through the simplicity and bluntness of her words that has, just really affected people. And that's why there is this movement of young people that I think is, in some ways it's my greatest source of optimism. I've taught at 9 universities, and I continue to interact with people, and they're mostly at college age. And it's really been incredible to me how much things have changed in the attitudes that my students have just in the last few years. It's really noticeable.
Do you feel that's because of society is forcing them to deal with issues a little earlier than they had to in generations before?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's because the signs of climate change are all around us, right? I mean,
True.
It's everywhere. It's water shortages in Colorado. It's wildfires in California. It's terrible air quality from smoke. It's hurricanes in Florida and southern states and moving up the coast. They hadn't had a strong hurricane of any kind in New England for 30 years. And
did you leave out earthquakes?
I left out earthquakes because I can't associate them with climate change.
Question: when there's a severe drought and there's a cracking in the crust, that wouldn't affect the earthquake any kind of way? Listen, I got my scientist hat on now, Alan.
Well, I'll tell you what, Lamont, you are on the cutting edge. There definitely are scientific investigations to look into those possible connections. But at least so far as I know, you briefly noted at the outset that I'm actually originally a lawyer, so I'll just leave it there. And I've spent a lot of time among climate scientists, but I'm not a climate scientist. Right.
Well, anyway, I'm just a talk show host that don't really know much about anything. So all this is a learning experience for me, and I hope it's beneficial for. Yeah, and I hope
think
it's beneficial for our listeners.
And I think what impressed me listening to some of your earlier podcasts is just you do kind of get the pulse of a lot of things that are being talked about and how popular culture and the like influences people's thinking, and that's all very relevant. I mean, I think but just to make a quick connection to popular music, by the way, when I was teaching this past year, I had to do it online, and my university was closed for face-to-face meetings. Everything was virtual, and we used Zoom platform, and one of the things that I was hearing about was people said, well, the first few minutes of your class, there are always some students coming in late, and it's always a little awkward. So one of the things that this professor told me is it's kind of fun to start with music, right? So rather than just have this silence to greet the students coming online, I had a graduate assistant, and I said, find me environmental songs to start the class. Here's a bit of music you might not know, Lamont. It turns out that you can now find collections of climate change related songs. There are a genre of climate change related songs, and there are even a few albums of climate change songs. So we actually started, and so I would just say I think that might be an indicator, right? I mean, this is the topic is out there because, as you know, people aren't going to sing about something if nobody's going to understand what they're talking about when they sing. So, you know, it's not Cardio B, but it's definitely stuff that has an audience. I'll put it that way.
Definitely, and I can understand how it's becoming more aware to everybody because, like you said, it's all around us, and we're forced to slow up a little bit. I mean, the pandemic made that possible. It made everybody have to slow their road a little bit because everybody was on this survival thing, just living their life, running through their daily activity. But because of this virus,
right,
everybody had to pump the brakes a little bit and slow down and start looking around and paying attention. I think during this whole thing, we start to notice a lot of things we've had the tendency to take for granted.
Like the weather.
Oh, absolutely, like the weather. I mean, we're just dealing with it, whatever. You know, it doesn't really matter, you know, till you go to a lake and you have a boat and you find out there's no water in the lake, and then you're like, what am I doing now?
Well, and, you know, out in your state, the impact on farming, right, is in the Central Valley and on, you know, the wildfires and how they've affected wineries down in Napa and Sonoma. And I like some of those products, and I'm, you know, reading about how the climate is changing wine growing. And then the water shortages are affecting water-intensive products like almonds. And some farmers
always complaining.
Yeah.
I'm always complaining about the food, and like it's just, man, seriously, it just makes you think about this climate control. Nowadays, the majority of the people, they eat to get full. And I asked them, well, how did the meal taste? How was you? Oh, it was just all right. It was just all right, you know. I mean, because the water shortage, there's a lack of produce. They're growing stuff too fast. They're adding, you know, chemicals, growth stuff. They're doing this, doing that. So the vegetables don't even really taste like they used to 15 and 20 years ago. They just don't. They look pretty, I give you that, but they just don't taste good. And because of people's lifestyle, they're so busy eating they get full. They're not eating because the food tastes good, but they don't realize this vicious circle. You know, the lack of water, all this stuff is just this vicious circle. So again, I say we need to hurry up and learn how to get out of our own way. Like I read somewhere that you said, else this thing may not be irreversible.
Yeah, and, you know, that's why I think this, just to come back to the main message in the book, we really emphasize how important the next 10 years or so are in giving us the chance to make a difference. And if we can reduce these short-lived climate pollutants that don't stay in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide. And I didn't actually, you know, maybe, Lamont, I should just say a little more about what these short-lived climate pollutants are, because we kind of skipped over that a little bit, I realize. But
yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, the one that's actually now starting to get quite a bit of attention is methane. And methane, most of us know better as natural gas. And the thing about it is it is a very potent greenhouse warmer. In fact, when you measure it over a 20-year period, it's about 86 times as potent per molecule as carbon dioxide. So every molecule we can reduce of methane, first of all, it only stays up in the atmosphere for about 12 to 15 years. And secondly, it's got such a powerful warming effect. So The good news has been that the oil and gas industry, which is one of several significant sources of it, it's from oil and gas pipeline leaks. Okay, and the big producers of oil and gas are actually supportive of reducing those leaks, because if it leaks, they can't sell it. So there have actually been some regulations published this year after our book by the Biden administration reversing a Trump policy. Trump tried to pretty much kill everything related to climate change. And the Biden administration and the EPA have been able to reissue some regulations for new oil and gas wells. It also turns out that there's a lot of methane that comes from landfills. And that is a source, incredibly enough, that is primarily from food waste. And this is something that one of the other books in this series, Resetting Our Future, I know you had Tim Ward on your show, and one of the other authors has a really wonderful book about reducing food waste and the use of plastic and such in your kitchen. And reducing food waste, again, is something that's really beneficial. And keeping it out of landfills turns out to be a surprisingly large source of methane emissions. And there are a number of other things that we list, and we do give some of the details in the book. And I also want to just briefly promote my co-author, Durwood Zelke's, the head of an organization that has the acronym IGSD. And his group, IGSD.org, has a wonderful website, lots of materials that tell people exactly what to do and document the science if you need to get into the science a little bit more. I'll just briefly mention probably the most controversial but significant factor in methane emissions, which is meat consumption, and particularly from cow burps. And if you haven't seen it, Burger King at their website has a wonderful singing commercial about selling the Impossible Burger and Impossible Whopper and how it doesn't release any methane emissions. It turns out that there's a lot of work being done on changing cow feed, particularly, interestingly enough, using forms of seaweed that seem very effective in reducing the methane that comes out of cows. But there's a lot of, the other point about some of this stuff is that there's multiple benefits. There's health benefits, there's air pollution benefits. So the reasons for doing this are quite substantial. There aren't nearly the kind of debates that we have about taking people out of their cars and the like to improve their health by eating somewhat less meat. Very simple thing to do, and has a lot of other health benefits.
Is this all meat or just certain meats?
It's pretty much grazed animals or ruminants. So we're talking about cows, lamb, to a lesser extent for certain people, goat, but not so much. There's not as clear an impact from chicken, for example. They don't emit methane in the same way. But, you know, there's just a whole lot of benefit from eating less meat. Now that I'm not a vegetarian, but I will say that there are a lot of other, health and farming benefits from eating closer to the land, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, while you leave it there, explain one thing, because I'm looking at this, but I don't know what it is, so
Sure.
Help me out. What exactly is wet rice?
So there are different ways that rice is grown around the world, but most of it, especially in some of the most prominent rice-growing countries where rice is a basic staple, the rice is grown by putting the plants largely underwater. And that process results in release of large quantities of methane emissions. So not all rice is grown as wet rice, but the dominant sources of rice growing around the world, particularly in developing countries where rice is the basic staple. So I for example, have visited parts of China, Bangladesh, and the rice growing that I saw was always wet rice. So
how do they measure the emissions from this?
Well, believe it or not, scientists are able to put measure over the relevant fields, and the sophistication of those measurements are, let me tell you, getting better and better. They're putting satellites over pipelines now and can tell us how much is leaking out of Russian pipelines. And but you're right that when you get down to the level of individual rice farming, that really are measurements that are done from averages measured by agricultural specialists. But we have a fairly good handle on it. But if you really like, I will send you a couple of documents that go into this in more detail. Again, not my expertise, but I can tell you there are expert documents that go into it.
Right, because I mean, there's things like the wet rice that again I know I've never thought about, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners never even thought about, or even the different chemicals used in refrigeration and stuff for the air conditioning. I mean, we don't think about that. We think about it when it's not cooling. Or we don't really think about it much
cooling.
when it springs a leak.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned cooling, because it's the other success story and significant short-term that we talk about in some detail. The technical name for these refrigerants is hydrofluorocarbons, but the simple way to refer to them is just by their acronym, which is HFC. And ironically, HFCs were originally introduced because, in contrast with the chemicals they replaced, they didn't damage the ozone layer. So the good news is we got rid of the stuff that was going to damage the ozone layer, which, by the way, were also greenhouse warmers. The stuff that former President Trump said were the best hairsprays he ever had, and he complained about this, like everything else, to protect the environment. And these HFCs have been used until fairly recently, and still are, in most of our air conditioners. The problem is they are also, like methane, very potent greenhouse warmers. And in fact, they are about 1,200 times as potent as carbon dioxide on a molecular basis. And they are, like methane, in the atmosphere when they're leaked out only for a much shorter period than carbon dioxide, again, on the order of 12 years or so. Consequently, the good news is that an agreement was actually signed, and we go into this quite a bit in the book because we think it's a success story with a lot of lessons. It was an agreement signed in 2016, so just a few years ago, but not, interestingly, under the climate convention that deals directly with climate change. It was signed under something called the Montreal Protocol. I think you made reference to it from my introduction, which was the international agreement to protect the ozone layer, originally signed in 1987, okay? Well, that agreement has been hugely successful. The ozone layer is on the road to recovery. It'll be somewhat longer before it's fully recovered, but it's getting there. And the parties under that agreement have this extraordinary record of success. And what they did was they broke the problem down into these individual different sectors or industries. So just to use the example from methane, if you imagine doing this for methane, you'd have a working group on oil and gas, a working group on agriculture emissions, and a group on landfills. And each of them would have experts with appropriate knowledge and a commitment to figuring out how can we reduce methane as quickly as possible from that sector. Well, that's what they did under the Montreal Protocol so successfully that they had this community of success. So if we kind of come back to your music industry, Lamont, it would be like saying, I want to do a hit record. I'm going to go to Motown, or I'm going to go to work with whoever in Jackson Brown's studio, and have a community of people who really know what they're doing and who are committed to adopting what comes out of it. And so back in 2016, even though it was not depleting the ozone layer, they agreed to substantially reduce, about 85%, the use of these chemicals called HFCs in refrigerators and air conditioning and chillers and mobile air conditioning, all these multiple uses. And as you can imagine, this is pretty complicated to collect all the HFCs from the existing systems worldwide. And it actually, interestingly, comes at a critical time because, incredibly enough, 13 air conditioners, roughly 13 air conditioners are sold every second.
Wow.
And that's somewhere in the world, right? And that's because, partly, the world is getting hotter. So you can imagine there are places like India where it's getting bloody hot. People are starting to be able to afford an air conditioner. Well, you can imagine if you have left poverty, what are the first things you want to buy? Well, very high on your list is going to be a refrigerator and the cheapest air conditioner you can buy. And the challenge is going to be avoiding this massive increase in the use of HFCs, which would, ironically, of course, require electricity, a lot of which would come from coal-burning power plants.
We're back in our own way again.
You got it, man. Your phrase just completely captured this situation. And cooling is probably the ultimate paradox, isn't it, right? Because as the world gets hotter, we run air conditioning more, and as people get richer, which we hope they will, right? We want people to come out of poverty. They will be able to afford air conditioners in places in India and Africa. And if we can't reduce the power and replace these HFCs, it's really double trouble, man. So the good news is that we did sign this agreement in 2016, and just this year, actually, even since our book was published in April. Since our book was published, both China and India have expressed, China has ratified this agreement, committed to comply with it, and India just in the past couple of weeks has announced that they're going to ratify it. So this is another success story. It's a really important model as well, and that's why we go into it in some detail in the book. So I hope that wasn't too long a diversion, Lamont, but I think it's I really did want to give some reason for optimism and to believe these things not only can be done, but in some respects they are being done.
And that's what we're going to hold on to, that part right there. But Alan, we're down to the last minute of the show, man. Look, time really flies when you're definitely having a great time. You
Yes, it does.
Great information. And I'm going to leave the door open for you so you can come back at any time. And for those that joined us late, the book we were speaking of was Cut Super Climate Pollutants Now. So it's available worldwide. So go out and support. These are things that could be helpful that you really, really need to know so we can stop taking these things for granted and we could work towards saving our planet. Alan Miller,
thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Definitely appreciate you. And again, come back anytime. And again, for those that joined the show lately, no excuse. Ask your mama, ask your daddy, ask the man across the street, the milkman, the gas station attendant. Somebody can tell you where the show can be heard. So there's no excuse. It's available worldwide in about 2 minutes. You really need to put your ear on this and tell your friends too. Thank you so much, Alan.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Lamont. This was a lot of. I want to tell you, Lamont, it was much more fun too.
Well, good. Good. You know, you got to keep a little levity in it. You know, with serious information because people aren't going to digest it any other way because there's too much drama in the world.
Well, you do a great show, Lamont, and I want to just thank you for letting me be on.
Thank you so much again, and you're always welcome back, Alan.
Thank you. I will definitely try to do that. Thank you again.
All right. Everyone, we'll see you guys next week, 2:30 PST. Like I said, the show will be available everywhere worldwide. In just a moment, you need to put your ear on today's show so we can save this place. And be safe. See you guys next week. Lamont Patterson out, and you've been listening to Can a Player Play? Have a good weekend. Or the rest of the weekend, should I say. Peace.
You too, Lamont. Bye.